Our teach-in this afternoon is sponsored by Citizen Action New Mexico, which is a local environmental advocacy group. Please help yourself to the bottled water and cookies on the side table if you haven't already. And this would be a good time to silence your cell phones. The purpose of our meeting today is twofold. First of all, to present important information about the Kirtland jet fuel spill from a panel of experts and public officials. And secondly, to give you the opportunity to get honest answers to your questions. So to promote these two goals, we have the following format. Roughly the first half of the meeting will be devoted to brief presentations by each panelist, around 10 minutes each, followed by a brief Q&A for that particular presenter. Brief, I mean just a couple of minutes. So you can ask questions of clarification or questions that are targeted to a particular speaker immediately after they speak. Then roughly the second half of the meeting, the second hour, will be a general Q&A. Questions can be directed towards a specific panelist or just towards the panel in general. Please keep your questions brief and to the point. We decided not to put a timer up to, limit your questions to a certain number of minutes, but we do have a limited amount of time, and so it would be really helpful to keep your questions pointed and as brief as possible. If they go on too long, I may reserve the right to ask you to finish up. Questions can either be made verbally at the standing mic, or you can submit written questions to one of the mic monitors. And at the end of the session today, if there are questions that have not been answered and we run out of time, then the answers to the written questions that we have will be posted on our website. So you have that opportunity available to you. Before we get started with the panelists, I've been asked to comment briefly on the article that some of us wrote for the journal. You should have a handout if you picked up the handouts that says Albuquerque's drinking water is not out of the woods yet. And then on the back of that, there should be a summary of the key problems with the EPA report. Probably many of you saw the front page article in the Albuquerque Journal on January 14th, which said that we had 30 years, that there's a new EPA report that said we have 30 years before the contamination hits the drinking wells. Well, this article that you have in your handout was the Citizen Action, one of the Citizen Action responses to that article by John Fleck about the 30-year time frame before we hit the drinking wells. So, again, you can read the article. I'm not going to go over it all, but if you could look in particular for a moment at the summary of the key problems on the second page. I just wanted to point out briefly some of the many problems with this draft EPA report. The first one is described in item number 2 on the summary here, that basically this is the most fundamental problem, is that there was insufficient data to really even do this modeling. There's not really data between the leading edge of the Plume and the nearest municipal drinking wells. That whole big area is between 2,000 and 5,000 feet. They didn't have reliable information about the nature of that, the geology of that area. They didn't have monitoring wells in that region. The monitoring wells are clustered, there's 115 of them, and they're clustered around the spill site. So that's the most fundamental problem, is they didn't really have adequate data to do the modeling. But there's some secondary problems. Given the data gaps, the lack of adequate information, they used some data substitution and made some very questionable assumptions. For instance, if you look at items 3 and 4 on the summary, you can see that there were 2 crucial variables in the model: hydraulic conductivity and pumping rates, which are fundamental, and both of these were biased in the way that they were put into the model. You can look at the description of that on your handout. I'm not going to go over it. Thirdly, really, the third source of bias is that there's an assumption built into the model that the EDB will decrease by 10% per year, even though there's no evidence for this or really even reason to believe it. That was just put into the model that every year the EDB is going to reduce by 10%. And finally, the model assumes a maximum contamination level of 50 parts per trillion and ignores the danger of EDB at lower levels reaching the drinking wells. So there's at least 4 important sources of bias in the article, and they're all in the same direction. They're all in the direction of underestimating the velocity of the EDB and overestimating the amount of time that it'll take for EDB to reach the drinking wells. So anyway, this is the reason why it would be unwise to assume that we have 30 years before the contamination hits the drinking wells. It's 30 years actually is a gross overestimate. And I might mention that I did this article with Dave McCoy, but also with Robert Gilkison, who's a hydrogeologist that works with Citizen Action. He was an important source of information on, in particular, the hydraulic conductivity variable. Anyway, more reasonable estimates might be 6 to 9 years, or the original NMED estimate of 5 to 7 years. But anyway, it's folly to think that we have 30 years. The other question I'll just leave, I think, for the moment as a rhetorical question for you to think about is, why was this seriously flawed draft report rushed to the front page of the Albuquerque Journal and plastered over the Albuquerque Journal saying that we had 30 years? That's something that I think I'll leave you to contemplate as you hear the presentations today. And the last thing I'll mention about this is that today in the presentations, some of our panelists will discuss the case of a toxic spill on Long Island at Bethpage Naval Base, where the original model predicted that it would take 25 years for the contamination to reach the drinking wells, and in fact it reached all of the drinking wells in 7 years. So that's another very interesting case study that we'll be talking about more of as the panel goes on. So I think what I'd like to do next is to very briefly just introduce our panelists by name, and then before each panelist gives their presentation, I'll give a little longer introduction. But first of all, just to tell you who's here. It's Dave McCoy here, Dr. Eric Nuttall, Ray Garduño, Counselor Ray Garduño. Counselor Ray Garduño, and Dwight Patterson. And Linda Lopez is not here yet, but I think she's on her way. And she will be, she's scheduled to present last, and she will hopefully be here by then. Okay, so to introduce our first panelist then, Dave McCoy. Dave McCoy is an environmental attorney and executive director of Citizen Action since 2006. He has a long history of environmental legal victories, including halting roadside herbicide spraying with Agent Orange, cessation of smoking in California State University buildings, achieving day worker rights, shutting down the Trojan nuclear power plant in Oregon, and shutting down two nuclear incinerators in Idaho. In New Mexico, Dave has led Citizen Action in seeking to gain cleanup of hazardous and nuclear waste operations at various sites, including Kirtland Air Force Base. So join me in welcoming to the podium Dave McCoy.
Thank you all so much for coming. Wow, suddenly got dark. I want to put this into context. You've all heard, how large this jet fuel spill is. It's estimated at 24 million gallons by the New Mexico Environment Department, but only about 5.9 million gallons by the Air Force. How everybody arrived at those figures is one of the great mysteries. But just to put this in context, Albuquerque's facing water apocalypse. This spill is part of 60 years of an ongoing poor safety culture at the Kirtland Sandia Military Industrial Complex. The operations out there at Sandia have left large groundwater plumes of nitrates and trichloroethylene, TCE, They've left the mixed waste landfill in place. There's open burn and detonation operations that put hydrogen cyanide gas and dioxin into our air. There's nuclear operations at Sandia that release plutonium-241, tritium, cesium, strontium. They operate without a current environmental impact statement, and there's many other problems. So at Kirtland Air Force Base, we have a situation where there were many toxic dumps left in place that were poorly categorized and characterized. They don't really know what's in some of those dumps, haven't looked at them closely. But the point is, it's not just this jet fuel contamination that's problematic out there. There's other matters. How much was spilled is unknown because Kirtland either did not or cannot produce records for how much was lost. Initially, when they discovered the spill, they say in 1999, they thought it was 157,000 gallons, and that estimate rose to 24 million gallons by the New Mexico Environment Department. I want to impress upon you the danger of what we're dealing with here and how important it is for those of us who live in Albuquerque to get involved in this issue. You can forget about global warming and WIP and Los Alamos and all of that. The most serious threat to our homes and businesses and our health is this plume of ethylene dibromide. The short name for it is EDB, every dog bites, right? So in every gallon of the possibly millions of gallons of aviation gas that were spilled, there was a half a teaspoon of ethylene dibromide as an anti-knock agent. That 1/2 teaspoon is capable of contaminating about 13 to 15 million gallons of drinking water above the maximum contaminant limit. So if you have millions of these little half teaspoons floating around in the aquifer, you've got literally trillions of gallons of water that can be contaminated by EDB. I need that water there. No. The problem with ethylene dibromide is that it's highly soluble in water. It moves with the water, and it's created a plume that reaches 6,000 feet, and it's 1,000 feet wide, and right now it's about, this edge of the plume here is about 4,000 feet away from the nearest Ridgecrest wells. As this plume heads north, it threatens our most productive wells in the aquifer. And 80% of that plume is above the base boundary at Gibson Avenue. So 80% of that is past the boundary there. And what it's done is it's made a portion of the aquifer that's totally unusable by the city of Albuquerque, that's us, the water users, and for the water utility authority to provide water from. In other words, maybe 50, 60 years ago, you could have dropped a well down in this area and you would have gotten nice pure water. It was 12,000 years old from the Ice Age, but you can't do that now. Now, when the laboratory gives their performances, they show this outer line here as the outer edge of this plume. But it's a fictitious line. I want you to understand why. It's set at 50 part per trillion limit, which is the maximum drinking water limit, when in fact they can detect down to 10 parts per trillion. So we don't know how far out this plume actually extends. They don't know the length of it. They don't know the full width of it. They don't know how deep it goes. They don't know how fast it's moving. But they're willing to submit a claim to the New Mexico Environment Department stating that there are no data gaps. That's totally false, and the public should be loudly complaining about that to the Environment Department. Last night there was a presentation by the Water Utility Authority in which Rick Sheehan, who's in the back row there, we see you, Rick, presented a lot of these data gaps, and these data gaps have been pointed out for several years now, so they haven't been resolved. Well, why haven't they been resolved? Who's in charge here? Who's the adult on the street? Well, it's the New Mexico Environment Department. Why are they in charge? Because there's a law called the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act. It's the federal hazardous waste management law for the entire nation, and it was given by the EPA to the New Mexico Environment Department for enforcement. But the problem is the Environment Department has not done a great job of enforcing it. Now, part of that is related to the constant turnover in the Environment Department. It's been in 3 different divisions over the years. There's been 4 different secretaries for the Environment Department. When one Hazardous Waste Bureau chief got very aggressive about demanding cleanup in 2010, he was subsequently fired or removed from that department after Governor Martinez came on board. So we've had 12 base commanders that have come and gone, and Kirtland has had a very piecemeal approach to this entire problem. The Environment Department, despite its full authority to order Kirtland Air Force Base to do things like putting in an adequate number of monitoring wells in this area between here and where the municipal wells lie, has not enforced that. They asked at one point in time, not a couple of years ago, for the Air Force to put in 33 monitoring wells, and the Air Force said, "Well, we'll give you 9." What did the Environment Department do about it? Nothing. What could they have done about it? They could have fined them $10,000 every day for violation of that order. They could have taken them to court. They failed to act when there was supposed to be 16 soil vapor extraction units put in back in the between 2000 and 2009, and they did not do that. So there's been a lot of laxness in this. What we need at this point in time, and we've asked for it in the New Mexico legislature, put it in place, is we want an independent task force to be established, scientific look at this entire problem, because right now it's just being handled too piecemeal between the Environment Department, the Air Force and its contractors, the Water Utility Authority. There's no real good approach to this, and I'm really asking the public to get involved as heavily as they can in this matter, because that's the only group that is going to protect us is us at this point. I'd like to take some questions at this point.
Department is in charge of taking care of the problem at this point.
Right.
Can you speak into the mic?
Yeah, he's telling us the Environment Department is in charge of taking care of the problem at this point. Would there be any advantage to having home rule over this particular problem, say with the Water Authority, if the word authority is the correct word to use?
In my opinion, no. The problem is too complex at this point, and I think that we really need to get an independent look at the situation. There's been way too much political maneuvering within the government and between these various agencies to give us any kind of real protection. So we'd like to see the National Academy of Sciences get involved in this. They do that kind of independent task force review of these problems, and we'd like to have them say, you know, what emergency measures could be put into place immediately, and then what kind of long-term measures should be looked at.
What is your feeling about declaring this a Superfund site?
Citizen Action has asked for several things to be done over time. The first thing we asked for was for the Environment Department or the Environmental Protection Agency to declare that this was an emergency situation and needed an emergency response right away. And it could have been done under either of two laws. One is the Superfund law, and the other is RCRA, the Hazardous Waste Management Act that I mentioned to you before. It could have been done under either of those two. EPA refused to impose any kind of emergency response. The Environment Department refused to impose any emergency response. So Citizen Action about 6 months ago filed a petition with the EPA, a formal petition requesting that it be put on the national priorities list. That got lost in the mail at the Pentagon, supposedly, and now is in the hands of the Air Force to review for national priority status, which would, you know, move this up on the list of places that need to be cleaned up. One of the things that has occurred in the last couple of years is the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry came to Albuquerque, and I remember one of the people sitting in the back asked, well, what's going to happen to our aquifer? And they said, well, you're going to have an orphaned aquifer. I guess an orphaned aquifer is an aquifer that not even its parents want. But that was the answer we got from them about what would happen in this aquifer. More questions?
I understand that in the last council of New Mexico legislature, you guys got quite far along explaining to people what the situation was, and you had, you know, maybe a lot more listening to than in the past, because the figures, you're getting more and more figures. But as far as this task force, who approves that? I mean, seems like after everything all the information you've produced, now you're asking for a task force. Well, who gets to say whether we get one? You know, what's the deal on that?
Well, the New Mexico legislature got it, understood the problem, and the memorial was to ask the congressional leadership to get funding and get a independent task force established. And we understand that there's some possible ongoing contact now with the National Academy of Sciences for establishing that. And that's something the National Academies does, is to establish these kind of independent task force to look at these sorts of problems. That doesn't mean that local people would be excluded. In fact, we've asked, you know, if they're going to get involved in that, we want them to come out here, and we want to We want to all have a discussion with them. But at this point in time, the problem has been that while the Kirtland and the Water Utility Authority and the New Mexico Environment and Kirtland's contractors may be meeting with each other, the public is basically not included in any of those kind of meetings. You're not entitled to hear any of the technical discussions that are going on until they choose to release those facts or whatever. So it's really hard getting information. I've filed numerous public records requests and FOIA requests to get information. So a lot of that information has been put on our website, so you can see that, the entire history of this matter. I'm informed I'm out of time here, so I will yield. Thank you.
If you still have other questions, we will have a Q&A, a general Q&A at the end, so save them for that. Our next panelist is Dr. Eric Nuttall. He's a professor emeritus of chemical engineering from the University of New Mexico. He has over 200 publications and presentations on the subject of in situ bioremediation, and has developed and manages a very successful field site for in situ treatment of nitrate-contaminated groundwater. Dr. Nuttall is presently a member of the National Interstate Regulatory and Cooperative Working Group for in situ bioremediation, technology verification, and chemical oxidation. So join me in welcoming Dr. Nuttall.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for coming. I'll try to give you as specific information as I can. As you can see from my first slide, I want to focus more on the technical. There's plenty of people here that can tell you other aspects about this. Beverly, when she introduced or started the group, she talked about an analogous site that we're looking at that's actually equal to or worse than this site back on Long Island. But it's more mature in its evolution of remediation and impacting drinking water wells and so on, and technology applications. And she mentioned the name Beth Page. Well, that's a well-known Navy and private Northrop Grumman site. There's tons of information publicly on it. It's in the state of New York. And we need to get moving on this, but we also need some guidance as to what's possible and what's failed in the past. So that's a site we're using. And as she mentioned, the modeling there, to be cautious, the model was flawed, and it predicted 25 years that they had before impact to any of the groundwater wells. Well, the reality was it was 7. Now, that model had some errors in it, so we don't know if you fix that model what it would have predicted, but it didn't matter. They were relying on the 25 years, and it hit in 7 years. So some of those things are really important. Another aspect you saw in the paper this morning, that there was a proposal, and a good proposal, on the part of the Water Authority to put in what we call a barrier of wells. And I'm going to have to go pretty fast here of pumping. I guess I'm radioactive. Sorry about that. I can probably, am I going to talk without that? Oh, I guess we still have it. Okay. Man, it's a sensitive beast. Hello? Now I broke it. Use a different one. Testing. Go ahead. Should have it. Testing. There we go. Thank you. Okay, well, let me follow on with that story real quickly, because I'm just pointing out 2 incidences that we can use another site as an example, and I have to move quickly because we have a very short time frame to talk. The second point that I was making is the idea of putting in a barrier well so none of the ethylene dibromide would get to the drinking water wells. Well, that's a good technology. They tried it. And I have to say for that site, it's not ethylene dibromide, it's trichloroethylene, but the behavior is quite similar. And what happened was the drinking water wells, which were much deeper and on the downstream side, pulled the ethylene dibromide underneath the purported barrier. So one's going to have to be very careful in terms of understanding and knowing the hydrogeology out at the site to be able to protect it. And typically at other sites that we look at, you have to use multiple barriers in series. So it's like having multiple filters through which you pass through. Okay, so I can't spend too much time on that. Let's see, where should I put, there we go. Oh, got it. Well, I think so. It's not advanced. Did I turn it off? Oh, maybe that was related to the lightning strike. I knew lightning would strike if I talked. Okay, so should I press this top? The side one. Okay, we got it. Okay, real quickly. We'll go through, is the laser. How much was spilled? This is an important and disconcerting situation that we have here, and that's the only reason I put it up there, and I'm a little sarcastic. I said, who knows, because you have 6 to 24 million gallons for of fuel that should be enough there, but basically that makes a lot of difference in terms of the amount of mass you have to get out of this system, and it's not acceptable to have a factor of 4 or so a difference in terms of the estimate. No estimates have come out on terms of how much ethylene dibromide we need to get out of the system. The amount's unknown. That's not good. We need to know that. In the outline, what is ethylene dibromide? We have to speak just very briefly about the chemistry because it is important in terms of how it behaves. Where is the ethylene dibromide in the plume? Well, it's moving towards the drinking water wells, which you have heard many times, and we need to talk about that. We need to reconfirm the fact that there are serious health effects associated with ethylene dibromide. It has one of the lowest, what we call MCLs, of any contaminant out there, and it is serious and has serious health effects. And then we have to talk about removal options, and some of that's going to have to be deferred to where you ask questions, but we'll try to get into that. That could be a whole hour or two of discussion. Ethylene dibromide is a simple molecule. It's used to scavenge lead out of aviation fuel. It does not appear in the jet fuel. It only appears in the aviation gas. And so those old engines that had pistons in them also had lead. And in order to avoid building up lead deposits in the engines, they added an additive, in this case ethylene dibromide, to keep the engine and the valves and so on clean. It has 2 bromides, one on each end here, which is really important because bromide is about twice the weight of chloride. And so we have a lot of chlorinated solvents that we use for analogy, but in this case, it's twice as heavy, and so it's more what we call recalcitrant and difficult to break apart. It also has lower volatility. It just doesn't evaporate. Well, that's good and bad news. Then you don't have vapor intrusion into your houses, but on the other hand, using SVE, solvent vapor extraction, as you've heard many times here, it's not going to be as effective on the EDB. Okay, so the other thing is that it's a small molecule and it migrates well and it prefers to split between the organic phase and the water. And it's now mixed with the jet fuel, which it wasn't in originally, but now it's all mixed down there at the source, along with the aviation gas. I'll be happy to answer questions later about that. it's in two places, basically. Everything started at the surface and worked its way down through the Vetus zone to the groundwater to create a groundwater plume. At the source, it's mixed with the fuel, and by the source, I'm talking about the groundwater source that you'll see on some of these maps in a minute. It has its own plume. It's separated from the petroleum plume or jet fuel plume and aviation gas. And how deep does it go into the groundwater? We need to discuss that because you're beginning to see from these graphs that it's seeing the effect of the pumping wells. So we already can see what's going to happen to the ethylene dibromide, the fact that it's moving, and how it's moving. Okay, so just real quickly, this is not a picture exactly of Kirtland. It's only put here for an example, and you've seen it many times for most of you. It starts at the top, runs down through what we call the Vetus zone. This is the groundwater elevation, and the red is the mixture of aviation gas, jet fuel, etc. And then you see this green that's separated. That's there in this cartoon to represent the ethylene dibromide. It's left the organic phase, the jet fuel phase, the avgas phase, and moved ahead, and it moves much faster. Let's go to some real graphs here. Okay, so I only have 3 of these, and you've seen these 100,000 times if you've come to the KAFB meetings, but I wanted to give you a little different perspective on them. Back here is the source, and it's the source of the petroleum, jet fuel, etc. And it has migrated in the shallow region up here to a few thousand feet to the drinking water wells, but notice it's right on line. Okay, I really got to go fast. Then it's in the intermediate going down into the water. It's also there, and the only thing that'll get it down deeper are the pumping wells, and the only thing that'll turn it into that direction, which is against the flow of water, are the pumping wells. And if we go one more real quickly, you'll see that at the toe of the plume, it's actually diving down at 100 feet and is starting to go down towards the bottom where the deep drinking water wells are. So we know what's happening very clearly in this regard. How serious is it? It has an extremely low MCL. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have skipped that quite so fast, but that's okay. Time's pressing. So the MCL is 50 parts per trillion. That means it's really hard to clean up and it's really dangerous. So what is it? Are the health issues? Right here, it's all of them. Reproductive, starting up here, human stomach, adrenaline glands, reproductive system, respiratory system, nervous system, liver, heart, kidneys, as well as cancer. So you've got it all with that. So we do have to take this extremely seriously. How do we clean it up? Well, obviously my time is at the end, but I'm happy to answer questions. There's much less in the Vetus zone. There's much more by many times in the groundwater, and we'll talk about those in terms of questions of how they do that. The SVE, air sparging is generally not effective. The current best technology by EPA is pump and treat with carbon filtration, and then there can be lots of discussions about in situ, but remember, before you even get to the drinking water, you have to go down 500 feet, and each well costs $250,000. So it's not cheap to do in situ treatment. So with that, whoops, I didn't go the right way for you. If I do one more, it went back to the front. Okay. Anyway, sorry about the shortness of that. I'll be around, happy to answer any questions. So let's take some questions. If you go to the mic, everybody can hear you, and I don't have to repeat it. And I do want to try to accurately answer your questions as best I humanly can.
Early gasoline engines went knock, knock, knock. they added tetraethyl lead to prevent the knock, 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 and it blocked up the engine, and so they added ethylene dibromide to clean up the tetraethyl lead. Why aren't we concerned about tetraethyl lead?
I'm not sure where the tetraethyl lead in this system is, to tell you the truth. I don't know where it's been measured or not measured, and what concentrations are there. All I know at this point is the EDB is still used in avgas, and I suspect that tetraethyl lead is gone from avgas, but I'm not an expert at that, and I can't swear to that, but it's something that can be looked up. But I can tell you we still are dealing with spills to this day of fresh EDB, and it's what's called an emerging contaminant because it's so nasty, so recalcitrant, so mobile, etc. Any other questions? And we're going to have a big question period. Yes.
I don't understand how the water is used from the well. Is that water for the whole city of Albuquerque, or just the area that you show on the map? Should the whole city be concerned? Is it just our local area that is really affected?
That's really, I'll try to answer it as best I can. It's a question for the Water Authority, and they can give you the most accurate answer to that. One, from my humble opinion, the whole city should be concerned because any contaminated water impacts all kinds of aspects of the city. Tourism, potentially your drinking water, dilution factors for other wells. These wells happen to be extremely clean, and I've heard different numbers as to what percent these wells impact, but they certainly, if you lose it in these wells, it's going to impact the city. And if we have less water, it's going to be less water for all of us. So it is not something that's limited to this little region here, in my humble opinion, but we have excellent people here to talk about that, and that can be addressed more accurately than I can provide. Yes? I do. I think that it's safe to drink the water in Albuquerque, and what the Water Authority is trying to do is to make sure that this does not get into the drinking water wells, which I think is worth every effort we can put into it. And so I'm an advocate also of the memorial to get the best and the brightest people out here to look at it. Albuquerque deserves it. Let's use the best technology as fast as humanly possible. It'll save the Air Force money, who are the responsible party, and we can all take a sigh of relief if they're successful. So I think we need to do it, and do it as aggressively as we humanly know how to do. Yeah, one more question, and then we'll have a good, I hope, question and answer period.
So, what do you know about bioremediation or microremediation with cleaning up jet fuel? Should it happen, fuel spills before?
Yes, that's a great topic, great question. In situ, that means in place. Bioremediation will be used at this site. There will be various treatment strategies ultimately used. Bio will be one of those because they've been effective at literally hundreds and hundreds of sites across the country, if not thousands. But they're difficult to implement, they're slow, and it will impact the jet fuel nicely. It has more trouble doing the ethylene dibromide. We talked about the chemistry. Even the bugs don't like to eat it. So it's man-made. It's not natural, and it's challenging. Okay, with that, I better leave time for the other people. Thank you.
Our next panelist is Councilor Ray Garduño. He was born and raised in New Mexico, and he's lived in Albuquerque's District 6 for over 30 years. He has extensive community engagement in the fields of education, health services, and service on multiple boards of directors of community organizations. It's a very long list. Sorry to not be able to share it with you. It's on our website if you're interested. And finally, as a member of the Water Utility Authority Board, Ray has been a vocal critic of the Kirtland cleanup effort and has consistently worked to hold Kirtland accountable. Join me in welcoming Ray Garduño.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for being here. And all I can say is, yikes! Can you imagine all those numbers? I mean, and we've been debating them for years now, it seems like. I've been asking the question for 4.5 years, and it's been the same thing. We're going to get to it. We're going to characterize it. Any day now, we're going to know exactly what it is, and we're going to describe its shape and extent and all kinds of things. You've heard a lot of the numbers, and thank goodness there are some really intelligent folks who have come up with these numbers and can describe them. I'm going to give you one set of numbers that I think speak to the core of the issue. The number 7. You probably wonder, what do you mean, 7? That's how many members are on the Water Utility Board. That's really important because 6 of those 7, and I'm not taking any credit for anything that I haven't learned from these folks, but 6 of those 7 somehow either have decided that the information is unimportant, the information is not cogent, the information is somehow going to be ameliorated by talking about it, but there hasn't been anything done. Nothing. Probably in the order of tens of gallons have been burnt off. And in fact, the engines that were used to do that have been turned off. And they were going to introduce another engine. It's just like a, internal combustion engine, but it uses the vapor from the jet fuel to burn off. And I can't believe that they can just do that without any qualms about the fact that they haven't done anything. They paid millions of dollars to Shaw and all kinds of other folks to come back and give them more numbers, which then they don't verify or allow to be verified. And then the Water Authority, and Rick's here, did a great job characterizing what those numbers mean. But one of the things that we found out is that there's data gaps. We don't know how close, how true, how real those numbers are. So when you take numbers that you don't know exactly where they come from, whether they're vetted by anyone else other than the people that are presenting them, the models that you present are only as good as those numbers. So, I was going to say when I started that I remember in the 60s, we used to worry about the government infiltrating the group that you were talking to because they wanted to know who and what you were saying. Well, I've been saying these things all along, and goodness, nobody's heard it. Nobody pays attention when you have the information at hand. All of these folks have talked to the Water Authority. They have brought the information to us numerous times. And yet there's pushback, if not from Kirtland, from the New Mexico Environment Department. Somehow they feel like they can take these numbers and massage them and reintroduce them so that they're not as scary. We went, as Dave said, we went from 6 million to 12 million, I believe, to 17 million to 24 million. Then all of a sudden, we were back at 6 million or 9 million. So I don't know what happened to the other 14 million, but it's a mystery. But it's a mystery that's really serious because I think the Air Force is either not really honest about what they're going to do, or they really don't know what they're doing. And I'll say that although I was criticized and excoriated in the morning paper, forget what it's called, about how I challenged Kirtland Air Force Base on this issue and also on nuclear weapons. All of a sudden, I was the villain. I was the guy that was going to destroy this cash cow, this $3.7 billion economic engine. Well, it's time we start asking those questions. I don't know. We might end up with an empty lot, as it were. But I'd rather have that than something that's contaminating the area and not owning up to it. On numerous occasions, I have asked here, both at council chambers and every other place I can think of to be, I've asked the Air Force, are you responsible? And they say, yes. Are you going to pay for remediating? Yes. How much? So, well, we've earmarked $50 million. That $50 million is gone already, and nothing's been done. So I don't know what it's going to take, but I don't care so much about that number as I care about the commitment that something not only gets done quickly, but it gets done so that we don't have to worry about it anymore. There was a question asked a second ago about what importance is there for the Ridgecrest well. My recollection, and I think I have it right, it produces about 20%, Rick, I think, 20% of the water for Albuquerque. Can you imagine if that gets shut off because it's going to be contaminated? Can you imagine? Well, the Air Force did us a favor. They had a study done, and they asked these folks with they paid them a lot of money. They came in, did a study, and the conclusion was that it could be that Albuquerque would run out of potable water, and we're going to have to look for an alternate source of water. And I looked around for the other spigot, and I couldn't find one. I don't know where it's going to come from. And those are the kinds of almost flippant answers that are given. And then they expect all of us to just walk away, go home, and say, well, they're taking care of it. Well, after 4.5 years, I'm wondering if it's getting taken care of. And I don't, I'm not a doomsday guy. I don't despair easily. But I do worry that if we don't apply pressure, that we don't get things done. Another thing, remember that number I told you, that important 7? Well, they're the 7 that you need to be talking about and talking to. And a lot of you do. You go to those meetings and you tell us what's happening, what you're concerned about. Now what we need to do is make sure that those 7 folks, me included, are not only serving on that board, but are interested enough to find out what's going on, are brave enough to ask the tough questions, and ready enough to be called out on the carpet. I was asked to come to Kirtland Air Force Base and meet. It was kind of funny, actually. Never done this before, having not held this kind of position. And I was sort of escorted into this conference room. And, to their credit, I sat at the head of this conference table. It must have been 30 feet long. About 20 people on one side and 20 people on the other, and all of them were, decorated. I don't know what any of that meant, but it was impressive. And I can only imagine how bad it'd be on their backs to carry all that stuff. And I make light of it only because it was sort of silly. Here you have this person who comes from the streets, as it were, who's knocked on doors and done all that kind of stuff, and who's avoided, really, the military in many ways, now is facing this cadre of, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have used the word cadre. I think that was a 60s word for communist people or something like that. And so this group of folks were there kind of looking at me like, how dare you question what we're doing? And my sort of intuitive way of answering that rhetorical question, was, how dare you do this to my city when you know that in 2 years you're going to be gone, or 4, whatever the rotation is, and have the audacity to sit here and say that you'll take care of it. I have no guarantees. You folks probably will be out of here before I even get out of this room. So, back to the 7. Be sure that you remember who those 7 folks are. And unless you really have a real, itch for a question right now, I'd rather just go on to the next person and then open it up for questions in a minute. But yes, sir. Okay. Sure.
It's hard to hear you. It's hard to understand what you're saying.
Here, you want to use this one? No.
My name? Are you one of the infiltrators? I'm
We
familiar
found
with
out
those
who.
from the 60s. What was I going to ask? You talk about the military and the Air Force as if it's a faceless, monolithic. They're human. You got me now? Okay. It's Bob Klein. You got that? They're not faceless. They're human beings. You must have spoken to someone personally, the guys with the stuff on their chest as well as others. We need to know who these are. What's their names? Where, in fact, do they live? They're here now? Are they going to stay here permanently? I want to know who they are. Who makes the decisions? That's number one. Second question. Ready? The members of the board, the Water Authority, what do you think, since you're on the committee, what do you think they all, maybe even yourself, have to gain personally from tossing this information away, not responding to it, not doing anything? There's got to be some personal gain. Was it to remain a member of the committee, whether it's money in their pockets, dare I say? I want to know why they keep refusing to accept that information and do nothing with it.
I can only speak for myself. I haven't made any money that I can. Well, but I may as well clear the air. And I don't know that anyone else has either. But I have a feeling that the disinterest comes from the fact that they have not, no se han enterado. They haven't questioned. They haven't asked, well, what does this mean? And where do we go from here? If anything, there's been pushback on anybody that might ask that question. When I presented a resolution to the group to say that, in fact, these folks helped me write that resolution and ask the right questions. When I presented that to the group, they had a competing resolution that was nothing but, the Air Force is wonderful, the great neighbors, all of those things. So it kind of diminished the questions that I was asking. How they gain from that, I don't know. I really don't know. Whether it's just that idea that if we anger Kirtland that they might leave. There's a lady here in the audience about 2.5 years ago. She's leaving right now. So I don't want to point out who it is. But she told the Air Force, well, if you're going to threaten us that way, then why don't you just leave? And, you remember that, Gene? So that's the thing. And you asked, who are these people? They're the heads of, the Kirtland Air Force Base. It's easy to find out. However, you have to go back 4.5 years. And in those 4.5 years, I think you heard a while ago, we have had, I think it's 5 commanders. Ultimately, it's the commanders who are in charge, and they're the ones that should be answering those questions. But we have from Manus to Manning to goodness, And I've met with every one of them, and the funny thing is we were talking about it a while ago, and it's It's kind of like talking points, right? I sit down with them, and they start at the top of the page, and they read all the talking points. And then I go home. The next commander comes in, I meet with them, and they start at the top of the page. You know, what do you do? It's not like I can fire them, but we all collectively have to put that kind of pressure on folks, including myself. Yes. Okay, sorry. Oh.
Is it still on? Yes. You mentioned 7. I think there are 5. 3 are not necessarily local to Albuquerque area, but 2 are. Are you familiar with the 5? I'm speaking at the national level.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
They too. Real quick. Sorry. Never give a politician microphone.
I don't know all the people on the Water Utility Authority, but I know that Ray has always been very responsive, and I've been attending those meetings for many years. And one time, Ike Benton, just to give you an idea of the mentality, Ike Benton introduced a proposal that all the city property that was steeper than this, so that people could not walk on it, that instead of planting that with grass, it should be planted with plants of the Southwest because it took so much water. No one could walk on it. It would be too steep, this part of the city property. And Trudy Jones said, you know, they don't call the green movement green for nothing. That green really always makes me feel better. So what I'm saying is, as far as the environment was concerned, at least for Trudy, and people voted against his proposal, everyone, not everybody, but the majority did. As far as Trudy is concerned, as far as I could tell, you know, the environment was not an issue that ever entered her consciousness. So I just wanted to share that with you.
Thank you.
Colorado involving some mine tailing issue, that particular them clean up and something similar to this. Yes. What I would like to do is to just draw your attention to a single case called Mann v. Ford. You can Google it. And what you'll learn there is that the Roanoke Mountain Indians had a case that was similar against the Ford Motor Company in that they were given a bunch of really bad land, told it wasn't bad. EPA came in and basically created a Superfund Band-Aid. The way that they fixed that problem was they went to a legal group by the name of Kennedy Madonna. And Kennedy Madonna is actually Bobby Kennedy Jr.'s one of his major law firms in regard to environment. And so those people have been notified about this meeting tonight. And I can, you can just simply Google Kennedy Madonna and reach out to Kevin Madonna and ask for some guidance in this matter. They have pretty much been the only group that I've found that have been able to put the EPA in its place in regard to how they react to citizens' needs. Thank you.
Thank you.
Before we go on, a quick point of information. One of the reasons why the Ridgecrest wells that are the ones that are most immediately threatened by the contamination, one of the reasons that they're so important to the whole city is that they're some of the purest water in the city. They're very low in arsenic, and therefore the water from those wells is used and blended with the water from other wells, which has more arsenic, in order to keep the arsenic levels down below the maximum contamination level. So that's another reason why it's not just this area that's affected by this. It is going to be the entire city. Okay, so let's go on. Our next speaker is Dwight Patterson. He's the president and founder of Zytec Instruments, located in Placitas, New Mexico. He has spent the past 26 years inventing and manufacturing fuel oil recovery pumping systems for groundwater protection, for the groundwater protection marketplace. And he and his company installed a first-of-its-kind jet fuel pumping system on Kirtland Air Force Base at Bullhead Park back in late 2006, which recovered several hundred gallons of liquid jet fuel in 2007 from the aquifer at a depth of 520 feet. This pumping system provided Kirtland and NMED with the evidence that they needed that the liquid jet fuel had in fact reached the aquifer and had migrated well off the Kirtland Air Force Base property towards the municipal drinking wells. So join me in welcoming Dwight Patterson.
I don't dare touch that thing. Good evening. Thank you all for coming to this meeting. This has been a long time for us. Dave and I have been working for 3 years and trying to put together a meeting. The problem was we knew we had to figure out what kind of meeting we could put together that would actually make a change. And that's what my talk is about tonight, is about, you've heard from David very carefully and eloquently, scary stories, okay? And Eric followed up David, scary stories. And we've got Ray, he's scared, okay? So I'm going to try to lighten it up with the idea of providing you knowledge that provides you power to do something. And that's what I've been hearing is the common theme tonight. What are we going to do about this? We know we're roadkill, but what are we going to do? And so tonight what I'll do is I believe that there is still time to greatly minimize the effects of this terrible Kirtland contamination. Thank you. So there is a poster in the back as well, so afterwards you're welcome to mill over and really eyeball it, but this is the Albuquerque wellfield system that they were alluding to earlier. Now, if you'll take a look down here, you'll see here's the star. That is the Kirtland jet fuel spill, and it is heading up, straight at this set of wells right here. And the way Albuquerque has created a really advanced water system for this city. There are 800,000 people depending on this water system. There's 90 million gallons a day being pumped. So the concern is this. If this jet fuel spill, which is only about 4,000 feet from the Ridgecrest 5 well, which is right there, this is a set of 5. These are sacred wells. They have no arsenic. The water coming into them is coming from a different direction than from Taos. All the water from Taos wanders down here and goes through 69 wells up here. There's 69 wells at stake here, okay? But just realize that this thing has been pulled 6,000 feet off the base, and it's going to be tough to stop, slow down, treat, deal with. And so when you lose one Ridgecrest 5 well, which is the largest producing well in all of these wells, it's the largest producer, it's producing no arsenic water. They're taking that water, walking it down to Ridgecrest 1, it's going to go up to one of these other number 1 wells, and they're going to blend out another 20, 30 wells that have arsenic. Now, that's funny. If you look at this history, you don't know you have an arsenic problem in this town, but I can take you to Bernalillo. They got arsenic problem, okay? But you do. You have 69 wells full of arsenic that are above the arsenic standard. But we don't have an arsenic problem in Albuquerque. Yes, you do. We turn off any of these Ridgecrest, you're going to have an arsenic problem on the headlines. So we want to save these wells. We want this thing to stop right there at Ridgecrest 5. This is the battle zone right here. These two, Ridgecrest 5, Ridgecrest 4, Ridgecrest 3. It's all headed straight for it. And you can see the way the plumes are with the arrows on that map over there specifically. You can see how they're pointing the arrows going right up to the 2 Ridgecrest wells. They are. That's where they're headed. That's not a guess. That's just, you can tell it's going there. So the Ridgecrest well field and the Ridgecrest wells are the first wells to get hit. 2 years ago, I worked with Ray and Maggie Stebbins, Commissioner Stebbins, and I said, look, this is the battle. We've got to prepare for protecting Ridgecrest 5, Ridgecrest 3. You know, we really need to pay attention to this. And at that time, they had convinced them that the Air Force said, no worries, mate. Everything's just fine. And so I just said, well, no, it isn't fine. What's happening is I believe the decisions made over the next year by the different government agencies will set the course for Albuquerque to lose all of its wells to water treatment, like the city of Bethpage, New York. Now, what Eric said is they lost the well. They didn't lose the wells. In 7 years at Bethpage, they went to water treatment on all their wells. They lost them all to water treatment because they don't have any water out there. And they had a choice, and we will have the same choice here. Do you want to drink water, or do you not? No, that was their choice, okay? Do we drink it or do we go to Manhattan, okay? They chose to say, look, we can treat this. Scientists came in, advanced teams came in because the guys weren't getting it, okay? They let this thing hit, and it shouldn't have hit. And they are drinking that water. It's a tragedy. It's the way it goes, but they are. But what we want to do is say, if we make this decision's going to be made here within the next year, maybe less, okay, that's going to set a course that the EDB, excuse me, let me go back here. The EDB, it's possible the EDB is going to sneak past these wells. Okay? It's not going to be contained. It's not going to be removed. It's not going to be stopped. And if we're not treating those wells, then you just lost your production. But there's 60% of your water is running up and down those 69 wells. And we lose one well, Ridgecrest 5, you lose a bunch of wells north of that the same day. So a lot at stake. Scary stories again, sorry. But I believe that the people of Albuquerque have a very important role to play in how the course is going to be set. This is really important. We've thought about this a lot. Dave and I have worked on this for a few years. Dave and I have actually spent about 3 years, really part-timing, but really, diligently trying to solve the most persistent problem of the Kirtland jet fuel spill. Now, it's kind of weird. I'm an engineer. I live to solve problems. That's what I do. And it's funny, at the last CAB meeting, Colonel Lanning said, I'm an engineer, and I'm here to solve this problem. Well, he leaves in 2 months, okay? I live here. I've been here 20 years. I really, really want to be here in this town, and I need this town to be okay. And so I've put my hat in the ring to try to help it get through this really crazy moment of dazed and confused, okay? And we're going to try to straighten it out if we can. The problem is, and if you can define the problem correctly, right, you can solve that problem. If you define it poorly, well, you're screwed. I'm sorry. It's just, bad days. You'll see the result of that pretty darn quick. Beth Page defined the problem, and in 7 years, they got to experience the bad problem solving. We don't want to repeat that. So here it is. The problem that Dave and I have been facing for the last 3 years, trying to change it, is that is the wholly inadequate, non-existent RCRA law enforcement by the New Mexico Environmental Department. This lack of RCRA law enforcement by NMED started in April 2011 when Governor Susana Martinez had James Biarzi removed as the chief of Hazardous Waste Bureau. And I've been with James. I was at the beginning of this. I was pumping the jet fuel. I just want you to know that pumping system is in a warehouse and they don't know where it is. But that's okay. We'll try to get a real one out there someday. But it's important that you, let's see. Let me change the slide here. Okay, so this is the journey here. So we first discovered Mr. Biarzi missing when he did not show up for the very important public meeting in May 2011. It was a very important meeting. We said, what's going on? John Keeling showed up instead. We said, we didn't know that there had been a shift. This article showed up in June 11th, 2011 in the Albuquerque Journal. Please take note of what I bolded. Do we get it? We're going to be kinder and gentler on this one, right? This is scary stuff. This is telling the regulators to go to sleep. That's what that message is from their leader, okay? So what I want to do is, what was Mr. Biarzi doing that got him moved from Hazardous Waste Bureau chief? He was in charge of this thing, to Surface Water Quality Bureau. I think he's out studying the silver minnows in the Rio Grande now, okay? This is your number one remediation guy in the NMED department. And they put him out to pasture. This is the first letter James Biarzi sent to the Air Force, demanding the Air Force submit a plan to the NMED that would stop the migration of the floating jet fuel, they call it LNAPL, sitting on Albuquerque's water supply, and remove all the floating jet fuel from Albuquerque's water supply in 5 years. Now, this was written on April 2nd, 2010. First demand letter from the NMED to the Air Force. It moved to hazardous waste because they wanted law enforcement. They wanted to be able to punch this puppy up when they found out 2 years after I was pumping the jet fuel, they finally found out that they got a problem in the city limits. Then they had to realize, geez, we might have to do something about this. Okay, if it was on the base, maybe not. As you can see in this slide, it's very important that you notice that, what's the deadline? Got to be able to tell time. Okay, it's not June 7th anymore, 2010. So let's go on to the next one. Here's James Biarzi's second demand letter to the Air Force. If you take a look at the text, you'll see the same flavor. Don't these two letters indicate a state environmental regulator wanting immediate action out of the Air Force? I saw it. He was pounding his shoe. You should see him in the public meetings. He was really after it. Okay, so they did. Now you understand, this is August 6th. When was the deadline? June 7th. Kind of running behind a little bit, so he sent him another letter. Okay, here we go. This is the third letter. Wow. You can really tell that the Air Force is deliberately avoiding to send in the contain and remove in 5-year plan, right? They even say it down there in the November plan. They said, what's this plan? Where's my plan that I want? No plan. That's December 10th, third demand letter. Here's the fourth one. This is James Biarzi's last letter. Okay, we believe Mr. Biarzi was demoted sometime after this letter was sent to the Air Force. There has never been another demand letter sent to the Air Force asking for contain and remove in 5 years from any of Mr. Biarzi's successors. And the Air Force has never submitted a contain and remove in 5 years plan to the NMAD. They've ignored this directive. That's against the law. They're breaking the law. And this contain and remove in 5 years directive is still in full legal force. And I put this in, I met with Colonel Lanning face-to-face with Wayne Bittner and said, you're breaking the law. You need to deal with this. I went to Tom Blaine, you're breaking the law. You're not enforcing the directives. He didn't even know that that directive existed. By August of 2011, Dave and I were convinced that John Keeling, who replaced Mr. Biarzi at the NMD, was not going to enforce the contain and remove 5 years directive of the April 2nd letter. So on September 22nd, 2011, I traveled to Washington, D.C. to meet with the head legal enforcers of RCRA law at the U.S. EPA to see if I could get the U.S. EPA to step in and correct the current lack of RCRA enforcement going on regarding the Kirtland spill. Sorry to report that after my visit and all of Dave's and my efforts over the last 2 years, we failed to get the EPA involved in the Kirtland spill. They have chosen to watch. That's what they're doing. They're watching. They call it oversight, but they're watching. They've been begged. We pleaded, sent 45-page justification letters for you to get in the game. This game is drifting. Governor Martinez had continued to demonstrate her willingness to sacrifice Albuquerque's water supply over upsetting the Air Force by recently appointing Ryan Flynn, a tax lawyer, as Secretary of the Environment. Okay? So, gee, how do we know that? Well, the guy published his bio right on his website. Okay, as you can plainly see, Mr. Flynn is also employed by the United States Air Force. Can you, I'm sorry, this is entertaining. Down at this last sentence, if you read it, not only is he a judge, an assistant judge advocate, he's fully employed by the United States Air Force today. Okay, now your guy who is in charge of your environmental department to enforce RCRA law in the Air Force. Basically, the Air Force is in charge of your state environmental department right now. That is crazy. David McCoy and I believe that Mr. Flynn is in clear conflict of interest with regards to the Kirtland spill. It is very understood in the legal community that a judge should never put themselves anywhere near a possible conflict of interest. Yet, here he is. It's New Mexico, what can I tell you? This is another clear action made by the Governor Martinez to ensure the NMED is maintaining a kinder, gentler approach to NMED. 3 years. We've had this consistency coming out of her office, making sure that NMED stays asleep on this one subject. Secretary Flynn replaced John Keeling late last year with Tom Blaine as his number one go-to guy for telling the Air Force what to do. And you've seen in the headlines, he's told them, you do this or I'm going to fine you. Or you do this by October, I need 1.5 million gallons pumped. You do this, that, and the other thing. He's made 3 demands on the Air Force already. As some of you may have heard, Mr. Blaine told us at the last Air Force CAB meeting that he has no experience in groundwater remediation. That's an insult to me, okay? I spent 20 years cleaning up groundwater sites. I have thousands of sites that I clean up. Millions of gallons I've recovered in my career. And I get this guy in charge of telling the Air Force what to do? I met with him for 1.5 hours at a private meeting, and I said, you got to get a grip. What are you doing in this chair? You shouldn't be here. You need to go find another job. You didn't listen. It's just the way it goes. So now I hope you see how the governor is making it impossible to enforce RCRA law in the Air Force. This is not an Air Force problem here. They will do what they're told, or they'll get fined $10,000 a day. They can be put in jail if they're not behaving themselves. The Hazardous Waste Bureau has the power to do all kinds of very nasty things to these people. Okay? But if you've got a guy if you have the person in charge that's an Air Force employee and you have a guy that knows nothing, you tell me what that makes the NMED today. Dave and I firmly believe there is only one authority left that can restore full RCRA enforcement onto the Air Force and save Albuquerque's water supply from this terrible contamination. That authority is the good citizens of New Mexico. Yep, you're it. We've been to the EPA. We've been to Colonel Lanning. We've been to the Water Board. We've been to the NMED 3 times in private meetings trying to get these guys off the dime. It isn't happening. EPA is not going to save this town. The water utility doesn't have the authority to save this town. They're going to be a victim out of this. And so the state needs a new governor that will promise the citizens of Albuquerque to change the leadership at the NMED so RCRA law can be fully enforced upon the Air Force. That's the problem. And my final comment, I'm sorry I'm over on my time a little bit here, but I'll just close with this. At last night's water utility meeting, one of their staff, Rick Sheehan, who is here tonight, recommended to the Water Board a remediation approach for the Kirtland spill. Let's get in this. Let me show you how to get it done. This kind of action surely indicates that the water utility staff believes that there really is nobody home at the NMED. You got the water utility acting like environmental consulting firms. That's their job. The water utility's job is to step up and say to the NMED, what in the hell are you doing? What are you doing to us? This thing's 4,000 feet, and they just put a well between the 4,000 foot and the Ridgecrest 5 well. They just put another well 2,000 foot between there. Guess what that well is for? That's a decision-making well. They just, whatever time we have to clean up, stop, do whatever we got to do to save Ridgecrest 5, they just cut that time frame in half. So, shoot, what can I tell you? This is another great reason why we have to replace the governor and her appointed NMED leadership. Okay, we got a problem here. Thank you for listening. God bless this great state of New Mexico. We have two questions. Yes, sir, please, to the mic.
My name is Roberto Rivas, Southwest Organizing Project. I'm curious, what's the potential amount of water that can be contaminated by this jet fuel? And then that water, where would it come from? Would it come from the other city wells, or would that come from the river with the Albuquerque San Juan Chama water?
If I'm understanding you, make sure I understand you correctly, you're saying, look, if we lose Ridgecrest 5, can we make it up? Now, Ridgecrest 5, and Rick is here tonight, it's around 2 million gallons a day, Rick, is that right? It's 5 million gallons a day coming out of 5. But that 5 million gallons has no arsenic in it. And that's sent north to, we don't know how many wells need that 5 million, but it's a bunch. And so if you go to the Rio Grande River, you can't. One of the things that just happened to us a couple months ago, you might have seen it as a headline. It turned out that Texas went to the Supreme Court of the United States just recently, within the last few months, and won a court case that said that Hatch, what is that area down there? Mesilla Valley is taking water from the river, too much, can't do it. They've been cease and desist. So we have this huge water treatment system right in town ready to take Rio Grande River, right? Now the purpose of that river water was it doesn't have any arsenic in it. So they were going to take that surface water, treat it, and offset any demands we have here in the town. You think they're going to be able to touch that river after a Supreme Court ruling says, no, you can't touch the river. The precedent has been set. The water we have is what we have. And John Stomp's done a great job of bringing down the Rio Chama River water and tucking it under this city. But I got a problem. I got this great bad boy over in the corner, okay, that is going to impact all that water he's storing under your city. So it's kind of a padded cell thing. But
Okay, briefly, how do we get rid of Governor Martinez? Or maybe that's a question for Senator Lopez. I'll ask her later.
Yes, thank you. I'm done. Thanks, guys. We have question and answers coming up later.
Thanks very much. State Senator Linda Lopez represents District 11, which is the South Valley in the New Mexico legislature. As chairman of the Senate Rules Committee, she has for the first time initiated background checks for those appointed to the highest positions in state government and has taken on special interests whose goal is to line their pockets at the expense of New Mexico citizens. During the New Mexico legislature's 2014 session, Senator Lopez gave full support to House Joint Memorial 13, which was a citizen action written and sponsored memorial which calls for an independent task force of experts to review the Kirtland spill and make recommendations for remediation. This memorial was approved by large majorities in both the House and Senate, in part due to the efforts of Senator Lopez. Join me in welcoming Senator Lopez.
Thank you for, Thank you for the opportunity to be here. I guess I won't touch that either, huh? First of all, going back, this is not a new issue for our city. It's been there, but for me, in my perspective, and even for my residents that I represent from our South Valley here in Bernalillo County, it's kind of quiet. As I've been learning more about this information, more about this issue, I think this room should be filled with 300, 400, 500, 600 people. Many of us are busy working. We have so many other things going on in our life. But as I've been learning more information about specifically what has not been happening, the enforcement by our Economic Development Department, it's deplorable. I won't use other language, but that's the best I can go at this point. What we need is not a scare tactic for our city of Albuquerque, but this is a dire situation that we are in. We shut down. 4,000 feet is not long. It's not far. The estimates that we have is about, 30 years, I think, was what the last I remember reading about. Maybe it'll get there. With the pumping action that happens, as I continue to learn about this water system that we have, the pumping action is actually moving, sucking towards it all of this plume that's moving towards Ridgecrest 5. The pumping action is strong. The pumping action of Ridgecrest 5 is not even at full capacity. Just think if we were to have it pumping at full capacity, where would we be with this plume? I believe that when we passed the memorial out of the legislature, it did come out of my committee. The information and the testimony that was given to us, I think we needed even much more time in which to discuss it, even in the committee, on the floor of the Senate. Water is so precious. We shut down these wells, even with the, I call it the barrier well, just to quote unquote shut the system down if the EDB does reach there. It has an economic effect on the city. The city of Albuquerque is the economic engine for our state in many, many respects. We have to make sure that the people in our city and surrounding communities understand how important it is to make a difference. Yes, and how do we do that? With the current administration that's there, it ain't going to change. There is a conflict of interest. I voted no on Mr. Flynn when he came in front of my committee. And I quite frankly will tell you, I had many a public official come up to my committee supporting Mr. Flynn, who are members of a certain group that I won't mention. It was not Ray Garduño. But I did have our own folks from our own community coming up to lobby on behalf of. And yet when you look at the conflicts of interest that Mr. Flynn has, there is such a thing as a judge advocate, the role that you do play. Excuse me. But he was passed, he was voted on by members of the Senate. Not all, but a good majority to pass him. We have to make a change in the administration. Yes, I'm a politica. Yes, I am running for governor in my party's nomination. But we have to take Susana Martinez, move her gone, out. We have to change the administration. The environmental issue that's present is something that has such a great potential of changing what's going on in our state. We have no jobs, we have nothing. Water is the most precious resource that we have. Without drinkable water, where do we go as Albuquerque? Where does our city go? Where do our children go? Where and what? Arsenic is not something that we want to have in our drinking water, is it? Where are we going to pull these extra resources of water if this is shut down? There's an opportunity that we have in front to deal with a plan here and now. Our environmental department has overview, has control over what happens with regards to our environment water. That is where the strength is, and nothing is happening. The letters, when I read through the letters that were shown, to me it's pretty black and white for those of us who can read, but maybe a few folks in Santa Fe need to go back and learn how to read themselves. This is an issue for New Mexico because Albuquerque is central to all of what we do. If we don't pay attention, that's all of us here talking to your friends. With everybody in this room, you have at least 100 people that you talk to and communicate with. We have to get the word out and let our folks know. There's a way to stop this. There's a way to take care of it, but it has to be done now. I don't want to wait 30 years because look what's happened in other communities. Models only work so good as information comes, and as a state legislator, yeah, we've dealt with that many a time. What input comes in, what you get as the output, well, there's always an argument to be made. I believe that we need to change the administration. We need to come to the meetings. We need to spread the word to all of our neighbors. The well goes north, it's blended, and it affects this whole section between the mountains going north. What does that do to the rest of the system in our fragile water delivery that we do have for everybody else? How do we redistribute if that EDB does get in? Remember, even just a small amount, as I learn more of my chemistry, just a little bit that enters our drinking water is disaster. We're a fragile human being. Well, we even have a more fragile system that is taking care of us. And what I advocate for, and I applaud those who were here for the work that you've done, but please, community, my community of Albuquerque, we need to own up to this. The word has to get out as to how we hold Kirtland Air Force Base accountable, working with our congressional delegation to appoint the members to this committee and not sit and wait anymore. I don't want to wait. I don't think none of us in this room should be waiting. It needs to happen. And in fact, I think the Secretary of our armed forces out of Congress, representing all of us in this United States, should be here front and center too. That's their responsibility. We pay our tax dollars for the state. We also pay our tax dollars that pay for Kirtland Air Force Base. Those are our dollars that we work hard for. There needs to be a response, and we don't need to continue on this venue anymore. We have to make the change. So I implore you, let's work together, let's figure this out, push our congressional representatives to do their job, but also we need to move and change the administration. Let's do it. Thank you.
Quick question.
If there's any questions.
Senator Lopez, we could just go to the general Q&A.
If you wish, that's fine.
I'd like to be the first one, yeah. Hi, I'm Robert Becker. I've been an architect in Albuquerque for over 30 years. And I'd like to ask Senator Lopez a question, but first I wanted to make a comment. I think everybody remembered Jean Dixon way back in the 60s. She was a psychic, and she had half her predictions were true, half were not. But at that time, she did make a prediction that Albuquerque was going to suffer a very drastic event that was going to sterilize the city. At that time, we were in the Cold War, so everybody was assuming it was something that was nuclear. But I think what we have is a prediction that she might have come true that is something just as bad with this water problem. So I'm hoping that we can avert that and keep her predictions wrong. But Senator Lopez, I'd like to ask you, if and when you're elected governor in November, what are some of the first things that you plan to do the day after the election?
Well, the day after the election is to put together a team to hire a qualified secretary to head the department who's committed to our water here in Albuquerque but across the state. When you hire a secretary who has at heart the issue on our water, how important it is for all of us, then you go through for the department bureau chiefs and everybody else in our state government to make sure that those persons truly enact, enforce, and work with our communities about water. And it deals with hazardous waste and many other departments that exist in our environment department. We need to make sure we take it back. And I will do that as governor.
Name's Charlie Bennett. As regards closing Ridgecrest, any of those wells, Ridgecrest, where does the plume go after that? Doesn't it migrate to another well?
Someone want to take that? Okay. Well, I guess we're into the general Q&A now. So,
Dave, you got to be there and Mike.
If you want to ask a question, it'd be good to line up at one of the mics. Get ready.
I don't know which one it is. The plume will continue moving. What they've done, what happens from the groundwater pumping is you've created what's called a hydraulic gradient, which is a slope, so to speak, where the water can just keep going from a higher elevation on through these wells. And what's in that area going north there is what's called the ancient Rio Grande strata. It's the old riverbed. And that hydraulic gradient created by the pumping of these very powerful wells to the north will continue drawing that contaminated water right on through there. So it's not just the Ridgecrest wells that we're fighting for, it's everything to the north of that. And by the way, that area that they haven't charted between the existing monitoring wells and where the Ridgecrest wells are, that can have fast pathways in it that they're not aware of. So that's problematic in terms of how soon that plume of contamination can arrive.
So next question.
My name is Sarah Friedrich, and I don't have a question. I have a comment. I'm mad as hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore. I've learned more from this meeting than from any other thing that I've read or heard about this subject. Thank you all for getting me fired up and giving me a lot of very practical information rather than so much technical stuff. But I'm just saying that tomorrow I'm going to write an editorial to the Albuquerque Journal, which I've never done. And I'm not a technical person. I was a Bachelor of Fine Arts, but I'm going to write a letter based on my takeaway from this meeting. And if 75 or 80 or however many there are tonight here could do the same thing in our own words, they wouldn't be able to ignore all of us. The other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to find out when the meetings of the Water Utility Board are. And I'm going to put out a note to my neighborhood association asking my neighbors to come with me. The other thing...
Every fourth Wednesday.
Thank you.
5 o'clock, City Hall.
Thank you. The other thing I'm going to do is I've got friends and acquaintances all over the metropolitan area. I'm just going to start talking to everybody about this, especially my neighbors, though. And I signed up to volunteer. So that's what I'm going to do, but I'd just love it if every single person in this room did the same thing.
Quick announcement by Marcus Lucera, our volunteer coordinator. And then we'll get on to the next question. You're next. Okay.
I'm sorry to take up your time. I just want to point out something to everyone in the audience. If you got a packet, you should see a little yellow sheet of paper. It's about the size of a business card. This is how we're going to do something about it. You heard Senator Lopez. You heard Councilman Ray. You heard Dwight. It's going to be up to us to make this change. And what I want you all to do is that if you want to help me and the rest of my friends up here make this change, you need to sign this and just drop it on the table or give it to me. What we're going to do is we're going to start organizing phone calling campaigns. We're going to start canvassing neighborhoods, getting the word out, just like this lady had suggested, talking to your friends. If you use Facebook, if you use Twitter, Instagram, whatever, get on there and start spreading the word. What we're going to do is we're going to try and ramp up the visibility of this to make sure that people are talking about this, that it's in the forefront of their mind every time they go take a drink of water. Every time they take a shower, whatever, we want to make sure that people are talking about this, and I encourage all of you to fill out this little yellow piece of paper and give it to me if you want to help. Thank you all. Oh yeah, that's the contact information. It's also on a blue sheet of paper. It's got the same information as that. If you guys have any questions, my phone number is at the bottom. Feel free to give me a call. Thank you.
Thanks, Marcus.
So, good evening. My name is Reina Luz Juarez, and I'm the president of South San Pedro Neighborhood Association. And I want to say that first I want to say that there's been a relentless pursuit on behalf of the agencies and the institutions that exist to help us and that have created this problem to disempower, to disenfranchise, and to dehumanize our communities in our pursuit to educate ourselves. About 4 years ago, my community, with the help of David McCoy, some other organizations on both sides of the feeling of alarm about this issue, have come to us, and we've asked, help educate us. We want to learn because we want to be informed as we participate in these CAB meetings, because you go to those meetings and you're made to feel ignorant, like you don't know. When you question the difference between 6 million gallons and 24 million gallons, they tell you that doesn't matter, that it's like a car accident, I think is what one of the dudes said. It's a car accident, and we have to characterize the car accident before we can clean it up. So whether there's 5 cars or 12 cars, it really doesn't matter, so just sit down. You know, we ask, one of the guys on the CAB committee, and this is something, so wait, first I want to get to my questions. Our community, what we want to know, I know, don't make me feel like the way I feel when I go to the CAB meetings, because that's why people don't come anymore. People quit coming because we're told we can't talk. I know there's time limits, I get it. But we're told we can't talk, we're told we're dumb, we're told we don't understand, and so I get really fired up. So the two questions, the things that we have come to that we want to ask for in our community is a health impact assessment. We want to know how to get that process started, and an environmental impact assessment. The third thing that we've been talking about, which is something that has been missing from this conversation, and I get so shaken up because I try and be respectful, is there needs to be a cultural impact statement. We live, even though this is a metropolitan area, many of us come from generations of land-based indigenous people, and we are taught a very deep and profound responsibility to take care of our earth. So it doesn't matter if it's happening in WIP, it doesn't matter if it's northern New Mexico, it is impacting our entire state, and those are our generations of children to come. And I've had people stand here that are supposed to be representatives, and I know I'm fired up, that have said, I'm 70-something years old, I'm gonna die tomorrow, so it really doesn't matter to me. That is so incredibly insulting and offensive. And to not know that if I drink from this water or that water, whether or not this should be important, that's disturbing. We need to know, people, we need to know that this is going to impact us all. We live in a desert. We're being praised every day by the Water Utility Authority for being good water stewards because we adhere to the 3-2-1 watering. And when we have a huge institution that has contaminated the heck out of our water, it's just wrong. So again, I ask, help us understand, how do we call for that? I've filled out the card and we're on the list, but those are the two things we want. And we really want for the conversation to begin, for that to be injected. What is happening culturally? I come from people who have told us, don't trust the government. You know, I've worked very hard to get to a place to learn how to exercise my civic muscle, but now with my children, I have to say, we're back to that place where we have governments that are polluting our waters and killing our people, and they don't care. So that's
We have about 10 more minutes or so. So if you ask your question if you can. If you want to write it down, and we'll answer it on the website if we run out of time. You're next. Oh, sorry.
Okay, sorry.
Thank you.
Yes. My name is Simon Polikovsky. I'm not here representing anybody but myself. I'd like to remind people that the highest elected official in the county is the sheriff. The sheriff can actually arrest the commander of the base and charge him with crimes, present evidence in a court of law. I suggest running somebody for sheriff that will say that they will arrest the commander of the base or whatever and charge him with destroying public property, threatening the health of the public. This is true. The sheriff has that power. I recommend running somebody. This will gain attention that, because I come to these meetings, I see the same faces over and over again. I'd like to thank the people at the panel for coming here and presenting this, but you need more people to understand what's really going on. So I recommend, honestly, running somebody for sheriff. The first act will be arresting whoever's commander of the base as soon as they come off the base, or even blockading it until they start a cleanup. And the sheriff has that power. Thank you.
I think you made your point. Thank you.
Lou Nicholas, if the NMED has this directive or whatever, and it's the Air Force is breaking the law and the NMED is supposed to enforce the law, and they're not, when can citizens or the Kennedy whatever group start filing the lawsuits to? I mean, can we get someone to enforce the law with a lawsuit, a citizen's lawsuit, or an NGO group filing a lawsuit on our behalf?
Certainly, there's gross negligence that we've seen. There's, in my opinion, criminal negligence, This is ultra hazardous activities that they were engaged in, so there's strict liability. The question of negligence says, well, what were the damages? Well, we're being told it's not in our drinking water. But what is the damage to the city? The city should be looking at this, because all of that water that's 80% of the off the base that's contaminated with ethylene dibromide is water that has been destroyed for the city of Albuquerque. Now, if the Water Utility Authority wanted to do something constructive, they could raise this issue and say, you know what, we're a stakeholder. And under the Resource Conservation Recovery Act, we can sue Kirtland Air Force Base, we can sue the New Mexico Environment Department, we can sue the EPA for non-enforcement of the law, you know. Now, whether the Water Utility Authority wants to step up to the plate or not is a different matter. Several of the members seem to be on a Kirtland Booster Club, and that includes the mayor. When have we ever heard the mayor, Mayor Barry, say one single word about protecting our drinking water? Not once. Not once has the man spoken. When have we heard Udall, Senator Udall, Senator Heinrich come out and say anything? The only one that's ever really said anything publicly has been Representative Lujan Grisham and our friend here. They've come out and they've addressed this, you know. Time for a lawsuit, that's a lot of money, you know. Somebody wants to leave a $10,000 check over there, we'll get it started tomorrow. Just put it in that. Leave it with Scott there. I trust him. Anyhow, that's a short answer to a legal problem.
Just want to thank everybody for coming up. And I wanted to say that I definitely think it's worth investigating and supporting a suit against the EPA and how well it's worked in the past. And that city of Albuquerque certainly has the right to do that. My question is for Ms. Senator Lopez. Do you plan on making the water subject a campaign issue? And do you think that you can bring more awareness to people since so many people are going to be asking you questions?
Water is an important issue in my campaign. As I say, without water in the state of New Mexico, potable, drinkable, whatever we need as us to sustain our community, economic boon, whatever else is being proposed does not happen unless we take care of our water first. Because we need to make sure all of our communities are taken care of. It relates back to agriculture, which is still very viable in our state of New Mexico. It helps to replenish our aquifers and everything else. I mean, it's at full cycle. And yes, water is and will be as I move forward, if I'm honored to be there, to make sure we do bring this out forward. I will. Thank you.
Okay, my name is Willard Hunter. A quick statistic. If you calculate the amount of fuel that was spilled in the ground, and we assume it was 24 million gallons over 40 years, that works out to about 67 gallons an hour, 24 hours a day, every month, every year that has gone on. So about 67 gallons an hour has spilled out of that leak. The EPA puts out a lot of useful information. And I want to read something real quick, and then I'll get to my question. It says, this has to do with soil vapor extraction. It says, SVE, soil vapor extraction, is generally more successful when applied to the lighter, more volatile petroleum products such as gasoline. Diesel fuel, heating oils, and kerosene, which is jet fuel, which are less volatile than gasoline, are not readily removed by SVE. So my question is a couple of things. What did the Air Force do the day after they discovered they had that leak? Did they start digging up the soil to remove that fuel? And secondly, why has the Air Force only used soil vapor extraction when they know, because I assume they read the EPA literature, that soil vapor extraction is not a good approach? Okay, very quickly on that one. That's a very excellent question. The Air Force has always been behind the curve on looking for or understanding the scope of this particular spill. And that's where we are today, and it's a long history of that. So in the beginning, they were hoping it was just on the ground, just a few feet deep, just an excavation problem, no worse at best a service station. And every time they've drilled and explored, which they've done in a very slow, as you suggest, and unprofessional manner from the point of view of looking ahead and thinking about what could be happening and how much could have been spilled. And they have basically, when they found out about it, they underestimated it. They put in the SVE and thought it was only in the Vado zone, and that solvent vapor extraction would get it all out. I was here in 2004, talked to the Air Force. They said we were a year away from cleaning it all up. So that no need for any help, we're in good shape. Well, 2007 came along, and they found that it was a little bigger. And then by 2011 or so, when they completed their drilling in 2012 and now 13 and 14, they still don't know the full extent vertically and horizontally of the contamination, but it's grown by hundreds and hundreds of times over the years, and that's one of the issues, is that they've continuously underestimated its size, scope, and seriousness and impact.
Can you hear me? I'm Sister Marlene Parrott, and I'm with the Partnership for Earth Spirituality. And I have two questions, they're related. Do we have a plan that we could say, we want this and this and this and this? And maybe is it possible that we can work with our congressional delegation to get the Academy of Scientists involved? I mean, is that possible? Because I'm thinking of the woman that said, I want to go on the streets and I want to do this. I think if we went and we said, we want this because of this, we want this because of this, so that we have something that is counter to the nebulous that's coming out and the inefficiency. Many times, a lot of us have come to these meetings and it feels like it's an exercise of futility.
What we've asked for, and the legislature asked for, is an independent task force. And we'd like to see that set up by the National Academy of Sciences to look at an immediate emergency response to this matter. Now, I have some other things on my wish list too. And one of those includes the fact that John Stomp recently on PBS NewsHour said, well, we're not going to let any of this EDB get into our drinking water. So last night, I submitted a memorial or a resolution for the Water Utility Authority to take a look at and hopefully introduce, and you all could call down there and say, yeah, we want this memorial, not to allow any EDB into our drinking water aquifer into our drinking water wells, you know, at all, zero. The EPA says that that ethylene dibromide is toxic at any level. Their goal is 0 EDB in our drinking water. So let's put that in writing. If John Stomp retires early or finds a more lucrative job, we don't have anything to rely on. So let's put that resolution into writing. The other thing that needs to be done immediately, and it was a resolution by the Water Utility Board, Resolution R 1214, was to put monitoring wells right next to the municipal wells. They say our water's safe. Well, you don't know if your water's safe because you got an 800-foot long well that's pumping 2,850 gallons a minute at a tremendous rate of dilution of any ethylene dibromide that you're looking for in parts per trillion. A monitoring well is 15 feet long, takes discrete samples. That's what we want next to our municipal wells. We want it now. There should be a whole row of monitoring wells that go right down to the municipal wells from where they think the edge of the plume is. And why haven't they used tracer elements in their chemicals that can chart how fast the plume is moving? You know, there's some obvious technology out there. You know, they want to keep this thing in the dark. The chances are that the Air Force doesn't really want to do any kind of remediation here. They told Congress in their March 2011 report that they didn't really want to spend much money on this, and that they were going to leave it to natural processes, bioremediation, so that the ethylene dibromide would disappear by 2025. Well, welcome to the land of mirage.
Good evening. My name is Michelle Mattis, and I was born and raised here in Albuquerque. So a piece of my heart is still here. However, I live in Valencia County now. And the conversation here is about Albuquerque's water supply, but one question I have actually two questions. One question I have is, how does this affect the surrounding communities? Should we be concerned? And a friend of mine here also from Bosque Farms is here, and is this something that we need to be talking about in our community? The second question I have is, where is the Attorney General on this? Has he been involved in this discussion at all? Thank you.
Warehouse 508 destroyed immediately from my perspective. It has a lot of health issues, as the young lady was talking about, our cultural issues. I mean, it's huge, and we should all be engaged in this conversation. And with regards to Attorney General King, I know he's in Las Cruces, I think, at this point, which is why I got here so late. I apologize. I don't know specifically if he's done any specific work with regards to this. He is the enforcer of many of our laws here in the state in his role as Attorney General. It should be something on his radar screen also. And just because they're on the other side of the mountain, they have water issues over there too. But again, I haven't seen anything from him yet either. But that's just me as a political person in the legislature.
I just would like to, thank you. I'd like to let everyone know that there will be an opportunity to continue a public discussion on this topic tomorrow night at 7 p.m. at a public forum and discussion being hosted by the Answer Coalition. We'll be talking about this particular topic in addition to some other environmental disasters going on in New Mexico, which will be the Mora County's fight against fracking and the contamination and health hazards being caused by uranium mines on Navajo lands. So I do have flyers for anyone who's interested. That's tomorrow night at 7 p.m. at 305 Washington Southeast.
Thanks, Bob. First of all, I want to say I was at the other one that Kirtland did here. Was that a month ago? And it's such a night and day difference. I feel so much more informed. I know it's a complicated issue to talk about, and I feel like I understand this issue so much better because of the presentations you each did tonight. So thank you very, very much. I also heard a question about, why isn't the mayor putting pressure on the Air Force Base to clean up our water? It's such an important resource. And it was 2 days ago I found out about an organization that I'd never heard of. And you can Google it. It's called the Kirtland Partnership Committee. That's Kirtland Partnership Committee. I've lived here 20 years. I've never heard of it until 2 days ago. And it's a booster group for the Air Force Base. It's their mission. And they list their board of directors. There's 100 board of directors. And it's the movers and shakers. It's elected officials. It's very wealthy business people. And I noticed on the list there's 2 general managers of our TV stations. Talk about a conflict of interest, right? How can you cover the jet fuel spill story if you're on the board of directors for the booster club for the Air Force Base? You can't. You can't. So I recommend each of us who are trying to get educated and empowered to Google Kirtland Partnership Committee. It's pretty astonishing. They have a lot of money. We have a lot of passion, right? And we've got morality on our side. So, I have faith in the people and us, but, that's what we're up against. And the more sunshine we can shine on a group like that, the better. So, thank you.
Thanks, Sue. I'll segue in with what Sue was saying, talking about conflict of interest. I'm Bob Anderson. At the last meeting that was here, I think those of you that were here, Sherman McCorkle got up, and I think we got a good example of the problem that we have. He's the head of the Kirtland Partnership Committee, the Base Booster Club, that wants to keep the base open and expand, and they see no problem at all with what's going on. And if you remember what he did, he turned around and tried to say that everybody who was criticizing the base of these problems are basically un-Americans, they don't value the service people or anything like that. I mean, it was very disgusting what he was trying to do, but that's, I think, an example of the size of the problem of where that's the core group that's fighting back against this, of getting any kind of movement done to force the Air Force to do anything. And I was thinking about that in terms of the question about Gary King. Well, they've all got conflicts of interest. Gary King, you don't see him do anything about the whip problem. He was on the DOE payroll advising them before he became Attorney General or anything to open whip, push it, he and the whole King family. So they're not going to do anything, say, well, we made a big mistake there. This thing is So they're all, most of them are on the payroll of the DOE and the military structure. That's the military-industrial complex. They run this city. That's what we're up against. And we've got to stop that. That's what we're trying to break, because I think that they don't care what happens to us. They plan on leaving here. At the last meeting, one of my friends talked to, I think, this guy named Beard from the NMED, and he told her, he says, well, don't worry about this. If it reaches the well over there, we're just going to drill some new wells somewhere else, and we'll do some desalination and recharge the water supply with that. How long is that going to take? What's it going to cost? Why not stop this right now? All those are problems or questions that are not being asked on this thing. One of the things that I've got on a question technically on it is reverse fracking of any possibility on this thing, reverse pumping, sinking some big wells here to pull this plume back maybe? I don't know. I'm not that technical on it, but can we dig up some of it? Can we dig some big holes in the ground and try to pull this stuff up out of the ground? I don't know. But I don't hear very much creative thinking coming from the Air Force and the NMED on this, other than, well, we've got it under control, just don't worry. The Air Force is awake tonight, so you're safe. So that's the message we're getting. Thank you.
Well, you're certainly right that you haven't heard a lot of creative thinking. And that's one of the things that is clearly needed. First of all, it is a complex site. It's 500 feet deep, and it's under people's homes. So it's not easy to get to, which makes it all that much more important that we have a comprehensive plan that takes into account what we can do and what will work. So that's why we feel very strongly in the memorial to get the best and brightest and most experienced in the country to come in, make an integrated plan that has a good chance of being the most cost-effective, fastest plant methodology, technology as possible. Going out and trying one thing and trying another thing and so on, or another technology, not a thing, is really a piecemeal approach. And I think we all know in life that you have to have a plan, you have to have a good plan, and you have to follow that plan in order to have success. And that's what we're trying to achieve here. And then just in closing on this part of it, I want to say I know personally that the impact of your concerns do get to the Air Force, do get to the system, and they are concerned about it. And certainly more concerned when you have the numbers, the voice, the loudness, etc. They do hear that. And the more elected officials you can get involved, etc., the more attention we're going to get and the less we're going to feel discriminated against, if that's one of the issues, or that they're not really paying attention. The reality is this should have been addressed as vigorously as humanly possible a couple of decades ago when they first discovered it.
I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. I think most of the people who have... He said no. Anyway, we're going to, for the last couple minutes, I'm going to turn it over now to Jim McKay. Where's Jim?
I'm right here.
Okay. Jim is one of the key people at Citizen Action. He's been working 2.5 years full-time. He's our webmaster. He's our technical engineer, and he's going to have the last word tonight. And if you have other questions or about anything, please don't hesitate to contact Citizen Action. We'll answer questions on our website. Jim.
Hi, everybody. First of all, I'd like to thank everybody for coming. I don't think we got to everything we wanted to get to tonight, but I think it's a good start, and we want to start doing more of these. We heard it back from a few people that what I long to hear, because it's the intention of what we're trying to do, is all the people that have gone to the KAFB meetings for so long, and you get cut off at 2 minutes, and you know something is being said in front of the room that's not true, again and again and again and again. And you get caught off in 2 minutes, and then off they go with something else, and 3 months later with the next one. It's the same misinformation and same misinformation for years, and nothing changes. And it was a good part of our intention with what we're trying to do here is to leave audience knowing that it's not getting cleaned up. Regardless of what you hear from the Air Force or neighborhood association meetings or in the journal, it's not getting cleaned up. It's really not. It's the truth. It's not alarmist stuff. It's not getting cleaned up. And that EDB is right underneath us here. That started on the other side of Carlisle and Gibson. It's out here now. You know, you might want to think about that. You know, and they haven't done anything. So, you know, a big part of this fight for us, since I've been in it, is to get a citizenry aware of what's happened in this town. It's been a big secret. But we feel like we made progress. We'd like to do more of these. We'd ask you to keep in touch with us. And there is a lot that can be done, and we've begun to see movement with it. And real quickly, because there isn't much time to go through this, we pounded and pounded and pounded Heinrich, Udall, Lujan Grisham, and for about 7 months, all we're told is, we're talking to the Air Force, we're talking to the Air Force, we're talking to the Air Force. We've had meetings in their offices.
We've explained this stuff in detail, and they look at you and they thank you for being there. You call them back in 2 weeks. Well, what's going on? Well, we're talking to the Air Force. You know, and I've never done this kind of thing before, but I've become much less patient, and we've really started to hammer some of these people and try and mobilize you folks with concerted messages that are relentless to let them know because they respond to it. Even if they don't like it, they'll respond to it. And we want to begin to organize some of this. Senator Udall is beginning to respond in very meaningful ways that might, it looks like, has a good shot at helping us get this independent panel. We want to do more of these. We want to coordinate community action so you people get involved. You can see the results with us. That's what it's going to take. And I really think we could do it. You know, a year ago I didn't. Now I think we can do it.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Okay. Thanks also to all of our panelists. Thanks to Mike Swift for videotaping and sound. And thanks mostly to all of you for coming.